Let's talk about some common developmental disabilities. We're only going to really scratch the surface of this. There's a lot that we don't talk about. We're just going to talk about some common ones, and we're going to be very brief in overviewing these. So we classify them in two different categories. They're either congenital, which means it's something that the person was born with. It happened before birth. Acquired is anything that happens either during the birthing process or afterwards at some point in development before the person becomes an adult, and that delays their development. So this could either be physical, or it could be mental, or it could be both. So one term that we used to use in healthcare, years and years ago, is mental retardation, and we don't use that term anymore just because it's been abused so much as a derogatory term. So it's really not appropriate for us to use that in healthcare anymore. Unfortunately, you will still hear some older, doctors or nurses maybe use that term. So the more appropriate term now would be developmentally delayed or intellectually delayed. Sometimes these can affect both. The person can be affected both mentally and physically, or one or the other. It just depends on, what happened and when it happened. So we have this idea now in the U.S. of mainstreaming people with developmental disabilities, where in the past maybe we segregated them from society, so they wouldn't go to a regular public school, they would stay home. Now, as children, we try to integrate them into regular public school systems so that they can be part of society, so that they can learn how to interact with other people and learn some life skills too, maybe. We want them to learn self-care skills, maybe dressing, feeding themselves, toileting, all those ADLs that we've been learning in this class. And we want them to, reach that highest level on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So that we need to provide for their basic needs, but we also need to make sure they're safe. And then they need love and belonging. They need to feel that they're a part of something and not different. As far as life skills, we want to make sure they are able to manage money if possible, or do simple tasks like going to the grocery store or getting on a bus for transportation. Depending on where they are developmentally, they may never be able to accomplish those things, but we want them to reach their highest level of functioning as possible. And maybe they, could live in a group home if possible, and where people with different developmental disabilities can live together and help each other, and there may be somebody there to help oversee them and make sure that all their needs are being met, but it gives them some independence so they don't rely on their caretaker forever. So there's different levels of developmental disability. Mild would be somebody that could maybe reach a 3rd to 6th grade level. So maybe they can read, and maybe they can manage money even. They may be able to have a job that's fairly simple, but may be able to live pretty independently. Maybe they don't need to be in a home or require a caregiver 24/7. Moderate would be somebody who reaches around a 2nd grade level, so that's the grade that my daughter just completed. So maybe they are able to read a little bit, manage, a little bit of money, but probably not live completely independently. Severe, the person may be able to do some basic self-care. Maybe they are able to use the restroom on their own or feed themselves. But as far as reading and writing and math, those things are probably outside of their reach. And then profound would be somebody who is almost in a vegetative state where they need 24/7 care, and that goes for everything from toileting, feeding. They can't do anything on their own, and they require a caregiver for all life functions. Something you need to be aware of is that this is a vulnerable population, and just like with children or elderly people, any vulnerable population is going to be at risk for abuse. So that's physical abuse with, violence, but it's also sexual abuse. So these people may be taken advantage of. If they are delayed developmentally, they may not understand these, when they start going through puberty, what those feelings mean, and they can mistake sexual abuse for a normal relationship. They may not understand that they're being taken advantage of. So you need to look for those signs, for bruising, for, discharge from the genital area. Just be careful, and if you see those things, please definitely report it right away, because we don't ever want to take that stuff for granted, because they are just so vulnerable. Some of the common ones you'll see, Down syndrome, although Down syndrome is maybe less common than it used to be, just because it's so common for Downs babies to be aborted. In some countries, that 100% are aborted. It's not at that level here, but for that reason, we're seeing less Down syndrome. It's not that the incidence has gone down, it's just that they're not being born. So children with Down syndrome are born with one extra chromosome, and it leads to frequent health problems. They may sometimes have cardiac problems. They kind of have that classic look of small almond-shaped eyes. They have a large mouth with a very large tongue that may even protrude. And so it's very easy to recognize somebody with Down syndrome. It affects every race, and it's more common in females that are have a advanced maternal age. Above the age of 35, the incidence kind of skyrockets. But it is something that we can see before birth, so they may be able to see that. So autism spectrum is considered a developmental disability. Some textbooks define it as a mental illness, which I think is probably incorrect, because it is not. It is a developmental disability. And this person will have difficulty relating to other people, so they don't necessarily see the world the same way that somebody that's not on the autism spectrum would see it. So sometimes they don't recognize humor in situations, or sarcasm. They take things very literally. Sometimes they have a hyper obsession with something small, like it could be, Lego or a certain animal, and they're very interested in that one thing. Like my nephew is autistic, and the only thing he wants to talk about is basketball or sports. He doesn't really have any interest in anything else. So you can see the prevalence is increasing as the years go by, and it's possible that it's just the diagnosis is increasing, not necessarily the prevalence. But we don't really have a reason why that's happening. There's a lot of theories on why the incidence of autism is going up, but nothing we can say definitely this is the reason why. So cerebral palsy is damage to the cerebrum. This can happen often during the birthing process. It can cause spasms, shortening of muscles. It can even cause paralysis, involuntary movements. Sometimes this person may also have some intellectual disability, but oftentimes they don't. It might just be physical. It might make them, give them the inability to go to the bathroom. They may be incontinent. They may need help with feeding. But intellectually, they may have a normal IQ. I say normal loosely because I don't like to use that term normal. So Fragile X is a defect of the X chromosome. It's more common in males, obviously, because it's on the X chromosome. It can lead to speech difficulty. The person may be hyperactive. They may have mood swings. We see that they may be on the autism spectrum. And something interesting is that they have very delicate, almost velvety skin. It's not super common, but you will see it sometimes. Fetal alcohol syndrome is caused by a mother drinking alcohol during pregnancy, usually in large amounts. It causes physical and intellectual problems. So you may see some of these typical features of somebody who has fetal alcohol syndrome, where they have skin folds in the inner eyes, no low nasal bridge, so flat nose, short nose. They may not have that groove between their upper lip and nose. Small mid-face, thin upper lip, small forehead. And unfortunately, they will have learning disabilities, maybe behavioral problems, and that is not something that we can cure. Spina bifida is when the vertebrae of the fetus don't close, so this is congenital. And it can be so severe that the spinal cord actually protrudes out. You may see an opening in the back once the baby is born, and it's very hard to repair that. It may lead to paralysis. We don't see it as much now that if people have good prenatal care and they're taking their prenatal vitamins. The incidence has gone way down, but we still see this in third world countries a lot where they don't have access to prenatal care. And then hydrocephalus is the buildup of cerebrospinal fluid in the brain. And in babies, the skull hasn't fused yet. Those bones are not closed. So all that swelling causes the head to grow larger. And we really need to get rid of some of that cerebrospinal fluid before those bones start to fuse together, because it can lead to a lot of pressure on the brain and damage to the brain. So this baby may require a shunt to drain some of that cerebrospinal fluid back into the cardiovascular system, right into the blood, and the blood will, the kidney will filter it. So that may be enough. It needs to be recognized early enough that something can be done before permanent damage occurs. Okay, so like I said, real quick overview. Definitely get more heavy into all of these things in nursing school.